Alright, this is the generic actions extension in Fantasy Grounds Unity in the Forge by Grim Press. Essentially, this was originally written to supply users with a reminder of actions that they never remembered to do. And it's basically these buttons down here. Currently, this is only for 2014 rule set, the Legacy 5e rule set. The 2024 rule set, 5e rule set, has changed some of these things. In particular, grapple, shove, some of the hide stuff, and in general, it's currently not supported at the time of writing this. But what this essentially does is remind users that they have a bunch of actions that they can do. And this is at the bottom of the Actions tab for PCs and at the bottom of the main page for NPCs. I'll go ahead and cover all those first. So basically, Grapple will apply the rule set for 5e Legacy on determining whether they succeed in the grapple or not. And in this case, it's going to roll versus strength or athletics, whichever is higher, or dexterity or acrobatics, whichever is higher. That's essentially what Grapple does, and it either tells you succeeded to grapple, or let's keep rolling until we get a decent result. Finally. Alright, so when it succeeds in a grapple, it's going to essentially apply the grappled effect to the target. In this case, it was a skeleton. And it'll tell who it was applied by, because that'll be used for when they try and break the grapple. And that's essentially what it does. It'll take into account certain feats for grappling, or at least the one feat, grappler, and apply whatever those need to be applied in the Legacy 5e rule set. And that's pretty much what it is. So if I'm actually running the skeleton and I go down here to break grapple, what I would do is I double click on it when it's his turn to try, and it'll apply again, whatever's best for him, dexterity or acrobatics or strength or athletics. And it's it just takes the best of those rolls and applies the versus, determines which is higher, and if it does, it does it. In this case, it broke the grapple, and if you look at the grapple is now gone, and that's essentially all the grapple stuff does, and the break grapple. Shove is essentially the same thing in terms of the rolls of grapple. It's going to take the best of strength or athletics against the best of dexterity or acrobatics and attempt a versus roll and determine whether it shoved or failed to shove. And the only result of this, I'm going to roll till it succeeds, is that it's going to just tell the DM, hey, you need to move him 5 feet away or assign the prone effect, depending what they were trying to do. So it's more of an informative thing the DM has to take action on. If you double click on dash, it'll basically be a notification to the chat window for the DM to take action on. And this will double his speed for this round. That's pretty much it. The Disengage is also an informative message, which essentially lets you avoid opportunity attacks. And that's more of a DM just saying, oh, I see they're going to do a disengage in chat, and we'll just have to manually do that. Dodge, on the other hand, will actually put an effect of dodge on him for a limited time. In this case, 1 round. And it basically is going to apply the dodge effects that are supported in FGU for that, which in general is the attackers will have disadvantage on you if you can see them. And some of these rules you just have to assume they'll not apply them or delete them. And then also any dexterity saving throws while that's up will be at advantage. And I believe that's taken care of by FGU. We're just setting the effect. Help, that's going to also apply something to the target where, oh, right, and it's going to warn you when you can't help a friendly target. So if you're actually helping a friendly target, we're going to clear that and say he's going to help the mule. And so Rangy goes in to help, and that should give the mule advantage on checks for 1 round and advantage on attack. Either one. It's the next roll will apply, so whatever they're actually trying to help. What else? Hide. When you do the hide, it basically will do a roll. Oh, there you go. And just tell the DM, hey, did they succeed on this? This is their roll with all their what they actually get for that rule added in, and it'll say, here's the number. Were you successful? There's not much going on there for hide. It's just giving the DM a roll already that's got everything put in. Ready is really just saying ready. It's informative only. Search is basically a perception or investigation, whichever is higher. It's just going to tell you, and the DM can then apply whatever that number means to whatever DC he's got in mind. Use option, just a reminder. Most of my players aren't going to do the informative things. They'll just tell me. But the fact that they see them down here reminds them they actually exist. So basically, when you do disarm and roll any attack, it'll apply the disarm rules and let the DM know, whether they succeeded in disarming or failed to disarm. And that's permanently set to be for all rolling. And of course, the DM would have to take effect, and if they have anything to disarm, they'd go ahead and drop that weapon manually. But that's all that does. And you can look up the rules, and all the tooltips say where the rules are. But it's basically applying that rule set. And it'll stay on until you click this to turn it off. In other words, you'll be doing all disarm attacks while it's active and none while it's not. Overrun is basically, you're trying to move past somebody, and then the rule set, you basically can't do that for an enemy. So when you do an overrun, it's going to go ahead and try and apply the rules of strength, or it's strength versus strength. You're trying to overrun somebody, and it'll determine whether you're using the strength straight out or the athletics. Tumble, pretty much the same thing, only it's for dexterity or athletics, or acrobatics. And then it just says, hey, if you failed, it'll tell the DM you failed, and he can take whatever action. And if you succeeded, you can move past. That's pretty much all of generic action's original functionality. But like most of my extensions, I basically just add stuff into different extensions over time that I want in the game. So we'll go over the options, and I'll cover each one. determine flanking advantage on melee attack. So basically, if you're in a melee attack, you can get advantage on the roll, +1, +2, or none. It's going to determine if anybody's within this cone on the other side where their middle crosses at. And if they are, then they'll get advantage. For example, if I move the mule over to there, and then I go ahead and have him attack with, say, the short sword, he's getting advantage. And it'll tell him, it says advantage given for flanking by mule. And of course, if I move him out of that range, right, he doesn't get advantage. And this cone logic works really well when it's bigger creatures, right? Because you'll have more spaces that it can occupy. And that's how I do it. That's how it's going to be done. You can turn it off if you don't like it. Let's see. So that's the flanking. There's also key effects that I support. And one of them is unflankable. So if you have unflankable in the effect, then it basically can't gain advantage by flanking anyone or anybody participating in the flanking rules. Disarm and overrun targets will get size advantage. Otherwise it's manual. I always have this turned on. That was basically when I showed you the disarm and overrun buttons. If the size is larger or smaller, you get advantage or disadvantage per the rule set. This is just if you want to have the DM take care of that on its own or have it automatically taken care of here. Tables used with dependent CT type. I always have this set to fumble and crit, although I can individually support it for each table. Essentially what I have in my games is I will have some of my games, not all of them. I will have tables for the fumble and fumble effect with a name of underbar, the type, like human or whatever character sheet NPC type you might have. You can put an underbar there and it'll actually say, hey, I see one of these matches out here and I'm going to use that. Or fumble underbar name of the CT name. And that'll be very specific to it. And what I've done is I've used the fumble and fumble effects in the critical effect tables with special names appended on them with an underbar and whatever the name is for type, or the underbar, whatever the name is for the name of the sheet. And what that gets me is I make up my own set of critical hits that are specific to a particular character in my game, which can be pretty fun. That's all that is. Ignore grapple effect. Basically, I used to have a mistake in how I played. Call it homebrew, whatever. I basically considered anybody grappled, they couldn't do anything. They were just like they were both arms wrapped around them. But someone pointed out that the rules were not really that. They could still attack people and stuff like that, and there was a rule set for that. This is just always going to be on if you're playing the normal rule set. You want the grapple, you don't want to ignore the grapple effect. In other words, or you do want to ignore the grappled effects because that grappled effect logic is incorrect for standard rules. You are allowed to still attack people when you're grappled. The verify attack is a core override of a base FGU function, which you always have to be really careful of doing. So I made it optional, but there's no case I will never not have this on. Same for the cast, These are just names of functions that I'm overriding inside FGU that are fairly low level and would actually require you to restart the app if you change the setting. But I would never touch those. I mean, those are basically required for handling pretty much all the functionality I supply here. Alright, so this limits CT effects from applying to attack damage rolls special name prefix if present name does not match roll level. This is something that was put in to support effects that will apply across everything. I mean, because of effect is on the CT and it doesn't apply to a particular weapon ever. So what happens is if, in this case, I'm going to have to take this off because this is using BCG to do some stuff. So I'm just going to cheat here and make it this so that it triggers. I don't have all the extensions I would normally be running. So I wouldn't understand that if undead thing. So when I have this set to off, nothing's going to happen. But when I set it to on, it's going to respect if I put a minus there or not. And the purpose of that is, and I'm going to show you without the minus first, is that if I do a damage roll, right, and we're going to go ahead and ensure that this is the client side, we're going to ensure that this guy is attacking and someone I've set up for being attacked with a lot of hit points, so I don't have to reset it. So he's going to attack him, and when I go ahead and do the damage, assume you hit and roll, it's rolling a huge amount of damage, right? Because it's essentially seeing this effect and isn't aware that, this only applies to one weapon. So in this case, if I put a dash here and I have the option set to on, then it will check anything in here for attack or damage rolls only that applies to attack and damage rolls. It won't affect anything like if there's saving throw or a nit or anything else critical. Nothing that doesn't apply to the actual attack roll, I guess crit would, or the damage roll will be applied. And so when I roll it now, it ignores it. And I've actually built myself a special 5e data set override because that's what I use to define all these with equipped effects and automatically put them in when I equip and unequip things. And these things were placed originally by that function in that demo. But, if you have something and you want the name to match only that for attack rolls and damage rolls, otherwise it'll ignore this whole thing, then you'd put a dash in front of it with this set. And of course, I will always have that set, and I've got a actual override for all my A5e data that I use with WotC data. I won't get into that. That's in the equipped effects demo. All right. When we come down to max temp HP additive heal syntax supported, this is basically if the name of an effect has this special syntax in it, which is curly brace max colon a number uncurly brace, it will make all temporary hit points that are applied in that effect only be a maximum of that value that's in there, and also be additive. In other words, every time you put something into the temporary through code or something, it will actually add it in. I'm going to show you another actual project that is SW5e Starships, where I use that as an example. There's the syntax. It's, max 9, parenthesis, and when you get 9 here, it's just going to be hard-coded to the max of 9. And when you roll this 1d6 plus 3, whatever that number comes up to, it'll be added onto this. And then it'll always only ever be a max of 9. What that lets me do is have shields, which basically you're bumping up the shield until it's full power, where you're using it as a healing effect. Anyway, that's mostly for me, but if you want to use it, there you go. I always have it on just in case I want it. No effect applied for grapple. That's basically going to mean that when you do a grapple, the effects are left to the DM. I turn that off. I want the effects to be automated. Otherwise, why would I want to do this grapple stuff? And then the range limits, advantage, disadvantage rules are applied. I always have that on. In other words, if I have a long bow, right, and I'm at 20 here, I'm going to pull out a little bit. And I'll use the shift since it doesn't really care about walls and targeting. So we'll go ahead and bring him up. And for the longbow, he's at 20. So when I attack, you know, that's a single die, right? But if I'm within 5 feet, that's going to take the range indicators into effect, and you're going to get a disadvantage. And if he's within whatever a longbow is, we'll see if that's far enough to be disadvantaged. Nope. Let's see what a longbow is. 150 to 600. So I have to be at least 150 away. We'll just hold the shift key there. I'm not, if I were above 160, it would tell me that I'm out of range. Was this? Oh, 150. I'm exactly at 150. Okay. And as you can see, you got disadvantage for that because you are, it actually tells you the range for the weapon. And that applies to anything that's, you know, a ranged weapon. Even some spells that have range definitions on them. They have to have a range definition for this to go into play. Also, some of the other keywords I haven't covered yet. Ignore checks will basically, all the checks we do for those generic actions you saw, the attacks and the damages have roles that say, are you paralyzed? Are you, you know, they won't do things if you're in a certain state. This will tell it to just ignore those checks and let it roll the attack or the damage. And flankable, I already covered. It's basically, if that's set, you're not going to have any of the flanking stuff triggered. No range, if you have that set, then all those range things that I just said won't be triggered. All right, this is a demo of generic actions layers extension in the Forge put out by Grim Press. I'm going to have a bunch of other extensions on because this has a lot of complexity to it in the background that I'm not going to really cover at all. You'd have to go through all the text files and everything to get it. But I'll touch on how it works in general and how the data is defined in general. Currently, I've got loaded in here for this demo the legacy DMG, PHP, MM, and some other modules, and the 5e automatic effect modules from Grim Press that go with those that'll define a lot of my effects and spells that get automatically placed into the combat tracker to help demo this. Now, it's also got better combat effects, gold, which is because it's got specific effects in 5e that are dependent on those special effect syntax that it provides. We've got generic actions because this was written with generic actions at the time, and there are some overrides that it has that in order to get things placed properly, we'll have to have generic actions up with certain of its flags on. It also has advantages PA extension, which is part of the advantages extension that deals with pointer areas for placing cones, squares, circles, so that you can select targets and stuff automatically, which this also depends on. And of course, aura, because the 5EA data that I'll be demonstrating also takes advantage of the aura stuff. So what does generic action layers do? What it does is it creates layers in the map, 4 or 5 of them, and it sticks everything in a particular group name for attacks, damage, effects, heals, saves, you know, whatever I override to trigger to generate an effect. And when you go into the options for this, it's going to initially default to have generic actions layer turned off. I'm going to go down here to the generic actions, and this particular one right here is essentially saying generic actions layer, is it going to be on or off? Are you going to be playing with it? Are you going to be using assets? Yes or no? And I always have this defaulted on because I'm always going to be having the assets playing around. And that basically will create layers and assets in the map for me when certain operations happen. And when the names they look for get matched in the asset directories they're looking for. And all the assets are looked for name matching in images, generic actions directory, subdirectory, or the campaign images, generic actions subdirectory. Those are under the fantasy grounds. You're probably familiar with them already. But those assets, in my case, I've created a module to deliver. And when you deliver a module with assets in it, it doesn't matter whether you load it or not. It's in every campaign you ever bring up. That's just the way modules with assets work in fantasy grounds. So I created one and put it in Dropbox, which is listed in the forums for this particular extension. And in general, it's got most things you would need for 5e Legacy, which is what I'm demoing here, in order to run your games. And it's basically, I've just created the ones I needed for my campaigns as I was running into them. And because these campaigns, there's this debug layer that I've got turned on. That's very expensive to turn on. And essentially what it does is it shows me all the assets that are going to be attempted to be put on. So for example, if I go in here, when this is turned on for gal, which I'm going to refer to generic action layers as gal, I do that in the text and when I'm talking about it. And so I'm going to say I'm going to have Wizardry Charmed. So I go ahead and drop Charmed on them, and you can see the Charmed there is being displayed as an asset. Same here. Now, some of these guys also had other things already intoxicated on him. So when the assets get triggered, they'll be put in, all effects will be put in a layer called GA effects, which, you know, I can actually delete here, which I wouldn't usually do, right? Because what's the point of automation if you're going to have to do it manually? And that's essentially what this particular, one of these flags in here, right here, where it says manually delete generic actions pointer layer. If you turn that on, you would have to manually do it yourself for anything placed, and you get everything cluttered. I would never do that. The whole point of automation is to just let it take care of it. So essentially what's going to happen is I've got those effects on, and if I want the map to go get them all, I have a button here I can just click, and it'll go put everybody else in there that it finds in your entire map and puts them out there. And if I do a button down at any time, oh, I shouldn't have that there. Button down at any time, right? It gets rid of it. And of course, if I drag and drop, it puts it back on. That's another option here that basically says, do you want to recreate the FX assets when it stops? I always have that on because I want it to recreate when it's dropping. And when a button down goes, it turns it off. It's just these are very transitory things. I don't want them around all the time. It would fill up your screen and do all sorts of things. But some things are permanent, like effects. They're always there, but I'm not going to display them all the time. But I will regenerate them. And you can do that with this map thing, or by dragging and dropping, or by doing certain other things. Like you saw when I dropped another effect on something else, it also triggered the display effects call that goes and gets everything updated. Okay, I guess another one while I'm here is this asset size. These asset size are bigger than the token because the token is going to block them. So when you define an asset, you want to define the outer ring of it in order to ensure that it's visible. under the asset. And that's what these scales are for. These are essentially the same thing. This is for everything. This is for just melee. The reason melee had its own subset that could be defined differently is because sometimes for a melee weapon you wanted it to be extra big, right? A different size than, say, effects and everything else. This layer NPC faction option is, I'll get into that when we place some NPCs via GAL. And that's pretty much it for its options. So I'll go ahead and turn those off. And so if I say rangy, let's take him for example, and we'll go ahead and say he's going to maybe take his longbow out here and take a shot at the orc. Now you can see on the client side here, and you can also see I'm doing a lookup every time here because I got that debug set. The only time ever that you would set this very expensive operation, it'll slow everything down hugely. You do not want this debug on unless you're trying to figure out what name to create for some operation that you want an asset for. Because there's so many rules for it, I just don't even do it. Like, there's an exact lookup, right, for any effect that's out there, right? Fey ancestry for these things. What else has it got? Like charmed, right? It did an exact lookup on charmed and found it right away, right? So that matched, and it tells you that. Ignore check. These are just different things I have currently in the effects. It's going through all the effects and trying to find a match for them. Intoxicated, it found one the first time, but I'm going to just clear that for now. And when you see the client over here, which has 3 logged in PCs currently, if you have this arrow showing, like I'm going to have shown on the host because I'm selecting, you probably won't see the default value that it looked up for a longbow, right? When it does the longbow attack, it looks up an asset match and then it applies it. Now, in this case, the asset match it was looking up, again, it looks in images, generic actions, or campaign images, generic actions. And my module it's just putting all these out here for me without them actually being in the directory. So if I look at the attack, and these subdirectories are arbitrary. All it's looking is under this directory for any name match it can find. And it doesn't care how many subdirectories it has to look through. It's just looking for the first unique match it can find based on its naming rules, which I'm not going to get into. So this was longbow. And, you know, do I see a longbow here? An attack alphabetically? I do not. So it's probably taken the default. If I look at the default, it's an arrow for whether it's melee, default ranged, and these default ranges have different values because it can, based on the distance, in this case 20, what's the closest one to 20? So it's probably picking this default 15. If I still had the debug up, it would be saying I'm looking here, I'm looking here, I'm looking here. Oh, I found it on this one. And that's essentially, it forms this name and tries to match it. And that's why you're seeing that arrow there. Let's go ahead back in here. Let's say you go up close. And again, on the client side, you can see it better because I don't have this. Or if the client was doing it, right? Same thing. Let's say rangy is going to do his attack from here. And then I'm going to unclick him. And we'll say he does a short sword, right? Well, the short sword gets a match, and it's an exact match, and it found something that I put out there for a short sword. You can see it attacking him. And of course, if I do damage, right, it'll look up the damage and apply it. In this case, piercing. So it basically puts that out if we look that up under damage. And again, the arbitrary name, all it's doing really is looking under all these subdirectories for this matching word. Doesn't care how many subdirectories. I just made these subdirectories for my own sanity so I could find things easily. And that's the one it's applying. And that's pretty much how attacks, heals, saves, all sorts of things work. Now, some things require matches in a wider thing. And again, you're seeing GA effect layers here, and I won't cover all the GA effects, GM only. If one of these guys was invisible, this would actually create a different layer because it would only, anything put in it would only be visible to the GM, those assets. They wouldn't be giving away the position of some invisible object. So for now, I'm going to place a fog cloud, I think. So first I'm going to have to go in here, take Wizardy, and I don't care if the wizard can actually cast this or not. I'm not trying to look at anything. Oh, he's got fog cloud. Great. So what I'm going to do is a fog cloud, if I looked up a fog cloud, would be, and the reason you see all this stuff here is because that's what is defined in my equipped effects for ensuring that these things get put out here with the matching 5e spells. But if I look at fog cloud, it's a 20-foot radius sphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a 20-foot radius sphere, right? 20. And I'll put it out here. You know what? I think I better take off his charmed because that may have some negative effect in what I'm trying to show here. I think I'll take off the other ones too, just in case. So yeah, basically I've just placed a circle, and PA remembers the last circle you've placed, or the last square, or the last cone. And if I had I'll go ahead and turn on the naming so you can see it, looking it up. Again, I'm not going to go into the whys of how the naming's done. All I do is I turn on the debugging to see myself. I don't want to figure them out. So let's go ahead and say I put that there, and then I go here and I just click on the fog cloud on myself. Now, what'll happen is it's smart enough to look those up, right? It basically got fog cloud and it said, okay, we're looking up fog cloud, pointer circle. Pointer shape lookup, fog cloud, pointer circle, no matching assets. Exact lookup for fog cloud self, default, no assets. And then fog cloud self pointer circle, it did find an asset. And so it actually put one under there, and it also put one under the NPC here that it looked up. And the NPC that was placed there, you can see there, I don't believe I have gal, so yeah, it actually placed an NPC that it looked up for a name match, which had a big complex 5e set of data for object and target. And I won't get into that, but you know, if I look at him from the player side, right, over here, he's gone, right? I can't see anything in there. If I go in there, I'm blind because that's got all the auras and everything else going on. I'm going to turn off this debug stuff because it's a pain when you're not actually trying to figure out why it's looking up a particular name. But it looked up that exact name and it found it in the module I had, or the directory, image generic action directory that I had. And it located it and it placed it. And that's pretty cool. And in this one, you can see they're tilted out because they can't see, right? You can see the darkness. There's a lot of complexity to it, but essentially all it's doing is it's taking data that was put in 5e, the name matching of fog cloud, and I'm not going to get into all that. That was covered in equipped effects, more or less, on how it drops things out. But Gal actually created this NPC based on the name match and placed it. The rest for the match on the NPC itself was because it was a fog cloud, and it said, oh, I matched that. And same for this here, that was the effect of fog cloud, right? They're basically both have effects of fog cloud on them. And so both those guys get it. Now, another aspect I should say about generic actions is if you have combat groups, and you have a combat group of a certain name, gal underbar NPC, I think, or NPC underbar gal. You'll have to look it up in the text. It'll automatically put this in that group. And if you have that group invisible, this will never show up on your CT, which is very handy also. And of course, it's smart enough to know if you, let's say Wizardy's here, he cast it, and he basically says, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of it. And he could have cast it from this side also. I just did it from the host, but I could have done it from here too. In fact, I'll do the control 20 feet. And because he can't see a lot, I'll just say he throws it over these two. I think this guy's going to be safe because he's outside of the center of that circle. But same deal, right? I'm going to go ahead and just set the effect on myself. And it's smart enough to say, oh, I know that. And you saw how everybody disappeared that was inside the cloud. That's because if you look on the host, you can see that this particular cloud had all sorts of aura stuff going on. And it had a darkness light going on and obscured, and it made the object itself unclickable and all sorts of other things. But to you don't care about all that, right? All you care about is, hey, look, pretty cloud. Hey, all my vision's taken care of. That's the beauty of 5e data. I'm too lazy to define all this myself individually, although I actually did, and then they took it or modified it. But, it's very handy. And a fireball has this, and there's all sorts of these casting ones. Like if I go and look for name matches, you can basically see a lot of the stuff that I support. This is just defaults, default power cast if you don't have one. I can't remember what triggers a power cast. Most of them I know are these power saves. Like let's say fireball. Those are cool, right? And they'll be placed out there when I do a fireball. And then because the auras with all the damage, they'll be doing the damage. So as far as you and your users are concerned, once all your assets and your data is out there, you do nothing. I mean, I don't remember all this stuff. I basically just move around and say, oh, look, it's placing that. I wonder why. Well, there's a fog cloud, but I don't care. It's going to do it for me. I cast a fog cloud. I don't care. It's going to do this for me as long as I use the pointer circles and stuff. If it can find a name match, it's going to do everything for me without me having to do anything. Now, there's other specialized stuff I've put out there, like for effects. I think I had a crazy effect just for joke on my players. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, there it is. This be crazy, right? And I think I made that. That's, what's the name of that? This be crazy self, right? So what I did is I said, let's say Wizardy has an effect called this be crazy, right? Let me see if that actually does it. Oh yeah, there it is. I can see it under all this mess I've made here, right? There it is. This be crazy. It's just another effect, right? That's all it is. So you can do all sorts of things. I think I did waypoints at one time for other types of specialized syntax and the effects, but I'm not going to try and demo that or remember what the heck I did. All I do now is they cast spells, I move around, and this is closed, and I never see any of it. It just happens. So that's how I want it. I want to think about nothing. I don't want to deal with assets at all myself. I just want them to do it on their own. If a player casts something, I want it just to happen. I don't want to manage it. If things go off, I want them to automatically go off. I don't want to deal with it. And that's pretty much the advantage of generic action slayers. Probably not the best demo, but you know what? It's a hard thing to demo. The gist is once you've got everything defined, you don't care anymore. It just happens. for you and your players, and you can enjoy it. It's the same with sounds, right? If you make your own sound library, and I use VLC for my sounds, then I'll be getting all these assets, and like an Eldritch Blast will shoot across this big blue flame, and you'll hear this lightning sound. Once I do all the work to set it up during my games and my setups, I no longer care ever again. And I'm at that state now. I don't care about the stuff. I don't remember half of it. Hence why there's a debug thing to show you what it's looking up. Anyway, hope this helped. That's all I got to say on it.